was wonderful. He's not kidding. It was Craigslist. So, I mean, hang on for this ride here. How is everybody doing? I am moving. I told you guys I wouldn't walk, and here I am walking. How are we doing? We just ate lunch, right? You ate lunch? Some of you ate lunch. Some of you had to go away from the chicken and the pickles, and you had to go for the roast beef. Okay, I'm sorry. It is what it is. However, we ate lunch. How many of us are extremely tired right now? I really am just sitting here because my professors are staring at me, and I'm exhausted because I just ate lunch. It's fine. Raise your hand. Dr. Chaplow up here is like, yep, I don't want to hear you talk. Yeah? Okay, how many of us are ready to go? Okay, cool. Isn't that interesting that food can kind of tell us how we feel, tell us how we behave? We sometimes look at, not having food or starving as hangry. That is a case for a behavioral change because we're hungry. Sometimes we're like, okay, I'm absolutely full and this is totally fine. I feel great. What if I were to tell you that it's not just the presence or the absence of food that changes your behavior, but the composition of the food of which you ate? Very interesting. So before I go on to that, we're going to talk about this lovely man up here. Hippocrates, the studious man on the screen behind me, has been deemed time after time a father of modern medicine. One of those reasons being is that he devoted himself so intently to greatering the better health for a human in ways that they could do it on their own. So not necessarily just giving a person medication, but how are they able to change their inner health, both mental and physical, by just working with their body in physical activity and diet. He was very adamant about the cure for you is through you. One of his major quotes, and one of my favorite being a nutrition scientist, is let food be thy medicine and medicine be thy food. So not only was he talking about this in retrospect to immune system and how to cure disease just by eating diet, he was talking about mental health as well. This is such an interesting thought. How could food dictate who we are, how we behave, how we feel, and how we exist? So let's take a deeper delve. So the human gut is lined with more than 100 million nerve cells, and it's practically a brain itself. In fact, you could also correlate that we have the brain up here, but the brain and our digestive system, or the digestive system, can act as a brain on its own. It is able to release hormones into the body that kind of go through, as we know, the hepatic portal, send all the way up and tell the brain, hey, listen, I am done eating. I am set, or even I am starving. I want something else to eat. Or, ironically, I don't feel great about this day. I am pretty happy right now, and all of this is because the component of food and the composition of what we eat can dictate how our body feels. Now, very interestingly enough, the gut-brain axis, they're very much intercommunicated, right? So they work together. The brain tells the gut, listen, you're starving. The gut tells the brain, no, I'm really not. I'm just sitting here. And we have to work between the two on kind of finding our happy medium. The very interesting part about this is that if the vagus nerve, the nerve that we're seeing here in the yellow, were to be cut, so not actually cut, but if they were to disassociate from the brain and the gut itself, both entities, both brains, would be able to react autonomously as they typically do. They would still send signals from gut to brain to gut, without this intercommunication. But it's very neat that we have this direct line. So as we typically think about hormones changing and it needs some sort of pleiotropic effect after you've eaten something in order for your brain to realize that you've eaten something and you feel better, between this nerve and these neural connections, your brain or your gut can tell your brain, and your brain can tell your gut almost instantaneously how your mood has changed. Super interesting. So it is potential that our gut and what we feed it can change how we feel. Again, not just because of absence of food or satiety, but because of the composition. So let's take our brain. We're looking at our brain right now, and if we were to get rid of all of the liquid in our brain, if we were to get rid of the liquid and the electric and the synapse and what have you, and we were just look at the brain, we would have what you see on the screen. Our fats, amino acids, proteins, glucose, micronutrients. We would basically have a recipe for food. Now, I do not suggest that we eat this, unless you've been watching The Last of Us, and then that's probably pretty accurate until the depiction of that show. For those of you who haven't watched it, please go watch it. But I wouldn't suggest eating this. Regardless, we have basically a recipe for our brain. Our brain is made of the things that we eat. Unless we eat amino acids or eat proteins, we really can't put those in our brain. And if our brain is created by these entities, it is necessary that we fuel as such. So to talk about some of the things that we had on the screen, I will talk first about brain energy and things that are used, or nutrients that are used for brain energy. Our first one being carbohydrates. As we know, carbohydrates, we can break those down and utilize the glucose from the carbohydrates for our brain energy. The brain uses 110 to 145 grams of glucose per day, uses that. Because of glucose, because of breaking down the carbohydrates and producing glucose, glucose initiates a response for insulin to basically come out and be the vehicle to move glucose where it needs to be, whether it be cells, organs, something along the lines of. Insulin is there to be the taxi driver for glucose, and that is pretty substantial. So we need both of these to work well together, right? Now, as great as it is to say, okay, I need these carbs because this is what's going to give my body energy. I know that I need X amount of carbs a day, and I'm going to get it, or for my brain, and I'm going to get it from this cupcake. If you were to eat a cupcake for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, or multiple cupcakes if you so choose, you're going to see that these refined sugars, that is not the carbs that you are interested in. These refined sugars actually have a detriment to mental health. Increased refined sugars, increased refined carbohydrates are going to result in negative mood changes, result in fatigue, result in depression. So the type of carb at which you eat is most applicable to what would actually fuel your brain substantially. Now, one thing I want to talk about when it comes to the brain, I was mentioning insulin. So let's look at our brain and its ability to use glucose like a lawnmower. How do we start a lawnmower? Do we put the gas in and it just runs? How many of you have ever mowed a lawn? Like, none of you are answering, and I'm worried. Okay, all right, yeah, we mowed a lawn before. I saw one, like 3 hands maybe. So we've mowed a lawn before, and you have to either turn it on with a key, push to start, pull the cord, something along the lines of, right? There's an initiation to get that gas from inside the lawnmower tank to make that lawnmower run. And then you can all of a sudden mow the rest of your yard, right? So we need that initiation to start with. That's the interesting part about glucose, is even though it may be abundant and we may have enough volume or enough concentration in our blood, we still need this initiation. We still need that vehicle. So we need glucose metabolism to be adequate enough, and the glucose that we are using to be relevant enough, so coming from these complex carbs, some of the ones that you're seeing on the screen, because that will help so we don't have to tune the lawnmower every 3 days. We'll have a lawnmower that lasts for, I don't know what your guys' winters are like, I'm assuming just like Ohio's, but like lasts for a summer that lasts for maybe 2 months. So we're going to assume that having the correct carbs will help with the glucose metabolism in the brain. Now, our other heavy hitter when it comes to brain energy is fat. Obviously, as you heard before, I am a ketogenic researcher. I do enjoy ketones, but this does not mean that I am anti-carbs. If you're in ketosis, and I'm just prefacing with this, if you're in ketosis and you look at levels of ketones that are quote-unquote keto-adapted or in ketosis levels, if you were to look at glucose, you will see that there is still a substantial amount of glucose in the body. We cannot get rid of glucose. In fact, if you did, that would be very bad. So I want to keep that in mind as we're talking about fat here, that this isn't saying completely, nix out carbs and get rid of glucose, because that is impossible. So back to fat. There are a couple superstars that we talk about in regards to fat, omega-3s and omega-6. Those help increase your memory, help with improved learning, cognitive well-being, increased cerebral blood flow. So when a baby goes from being, if it goes from being breastfed to formula milk, they increase omega-3s and omega-6s in that formula to help neuronal development. So let's keep that in mind. So there is reason for fats to be in these types of fuels, including, obviously, formula. Now, another part of fat is the ketone bodies. I just talked about ketosis here. We all basically know what ketone bodies are, right? Ketones are to fat as glucose is to carbohydrates. So ketone bodies, there are 3 different ones. We typically talk about beta-hydroxybutyrate being the main ketone body of energy. So that's what I will continue to talk about from here on out. Ketone bodies, they are associated with increases, sorry about my typo there, but increases in, apparently, BDNF and brain plasticity. Brain plasticity, if we don't know, brain plasticity is the ability to change as a result of experience. So we want to increase brain plasticity, and if BDNF is associated with beta-hydroxybutyrate and or ketones, then obviously we could see some advanced effects in increasing ketones due to brain development. Now, nobody throw anything at me, but ketones can supply up to 75% of the brain's total energy if the needs are necessary. So starvation or a decrease in glucose for any reason, or even lack of glucose utilization. Also, there are more units of ATP that can be created per unit of oxygen with ketone bodies. And then something a little separate issue, but since it's on the same slide here, ketones are not only an energy resource, but they also have a signaling effect as well. They can inhibit the HDAC pathway, which is an inflammatory pathway. Inflammation in the brain can obviously be detrimental. So if you have a signaling metabolite that also gives you energy, but is also able to inhibit HDAC pathways or inhibit inflammation, obviously you're going to have prolonged performance in cognitive function. And last thing is that it's forever energy. We will continually always have fat. There is really no way about it to get rid of fat. Fat will always be there. We'll store it back when it goes away. But also because, like I said, glucose cannot be mixed. We can actually create glucose by having higher levels of fat. We all know what gluconeogenesis is, and that does occur when somebody is in ketosis or has higher level of ketones in their body. Now, a couple other things that I'll talk about. I'm putting protein and amino acids side by side because they basically walk hand in hand, as we know. So increasing proteins or having a focused diet on some proteins in your body is necessary. Obviously, we want growth. But the amino acids that are affiliated with proteins are very essential. These can be synthesized into different neurotransmitters. Neurotransmitters, if we have them adequately or are using them appropriately, can alleviate depression and other mental disorders. A couple ones that we have on the screen. GABA inhibits excessive firing. Okay, is anybody claustrophobic? Just me? Okay, all right, we got a little bit. Okay, so I am claustrophobic. I am as claustrophobic as I'll get out. Like lots of people, small spaces. I'm also an adrenaline junkie, so I really not enjoy it. That's a weird word to say, but like I can manage it. So I'm a scientist. We do a lot of MRI research. I obviously will volunteer tribute for each individual science experiment possible, and one of them was an MRI. I swear I'm getting to the point here in a second. So the MRI, they shoot me in there, and I had them all strapped up, ready to go, and I am calm, and I am cool, and I am collected, and they're watching my heart rate go from 120 to 135 and so forth. And Madison, are you okay? Are you doing good? I'm fine. I'm absolutely fine. All of my neurons, all of the firing was happening at one time. Now GABA, on the other hand, helps to alleviate that excessive firing. So when you feel like that meme of the dog that's sitting where the whole room is on fire and everything's fine, GABA and amino acids are able to decrease that, able to bring you back to a steady state. Tyrosine helps with production of dopamine, helps with the production of catecholamines, which increases hyperfocus or just attentiveness, which obviously can be very good for mental well-being. L-glutamate protects against calcium overactivity, and the calcium overactivity in the brain can actually take out brain cells. So it starts to be, after an overabundance of calcium in the brain, it starts to deplete some of the brain health, if you will. Taurine helps reinforces GABA and their calming effects, and then 5-HTP is converted into serotonin. We know serotonin helps to promote happy moods. So there are some people who have decreased serotonin levels, and they tend to be a little bit more aggressive. My brother-in-law is very much that way, and I'll be like, I need you to go get some amino acids because you're being grumpy right now. So all of these things kind of work intermittently between each other to make for a calming, relaxed environment. Minerals, especially zinc, magnesium, iron, they all have important roles when it comes to neurological functioning. Zinc specifically is an abundant trace mineral, being involved in different brain chemistry reactions, and it's also a key element when it comes to immunity. Obviously, if we have a deficiency in zinc, we are seeing increased depressive symptoms, increasing anxiety, and there's also emerging evidence in regards to zinc being used as an adjunct therapy with antidepressants to help mitigate depressing effects. Now, I just want to repeat that over again because we're going to talk about this in a few. So you have an antidepressant, and you give that to somebody, but there is a nutrient deficiency that still has them deal with depressive symptoms. So we are adding nutrients to mitigate a symptom that is trying to be alleviated through a pharmacological measure. That's interesting. Table that, we'll talk about that later. Magnesium, can't forget that magnesium is involved in brain cell chemistry reactions, also linked to depression and anxiety. And iron is involved in many neurological activities, and depressive symptoms are very much there when when iron is not available and when there is a deficiency. But this may be because iron has a huge part in bringing oxygen to the brain. So these minerals are extremely, extremely essential. Now, I haven't brought up calcium and copper yet, but that is because we want to toe the line with calcium and copper. Calcium and copper in high volumes has been shown to be correlated with both depression and dementia. You want to be able to get them through your food, not necessarily look into supplementation of a sort. And I know before anybody gets at me about calcium supplementation, there is very little, I should say, of the supplementation that you take with calcium helps with bone density issues or lack of bone density. So in a study, it was of 700 women. They were taking calcium supplements, and they were from the ages 72 to 90. So obviously, we're going to see a decrease in bone density, right? We saw that the calcium barely helped with their bone density, if even at all, not statistically significant, but statistically significantly increased their ability or their potential for dementia. So ideally, with calcium and copper, we want to be able to use or get those through our food as opposed to supplementation, because how we metabolize those minerals is more prominent in digesting them through food. And then there's vitamins. Vitamins are wonderful. We already knew that, though. One of the things with vitamins is you can take a multivitamin, and that's wonderful, and sometimes it's extremely useful, but what do they tell you to do when you take a multivitamin? What do they tell you to take it with? Vodka, you're right, absolutely. No, food. They tell you to take your vitamins with food, right? Because of how we metabolize them. We're really interested in how the food process and how we break down foods as opposed to just supplement capsules. We are essentially most interested in how the body breaks down food. Now, vitamins are essential. So to be able to get vitamins, the appropriate amounts that you need, you're going to need to eat very colorful. I know there's a lot of people that talk about very colorful plates and making sure you get all the colors of the rainbow, and they're absolutely right. A diet that includes these vitamin complexes, B specifically, these help to boost immune health. Deficiency, especially in vitamin B, could negatively influence your memory, cause cognitive impairment, dementia, and then, we've heard of all of these vitamins. We know how essential they are for us. Vitamin D, we've talked about decreases in or deficiencies in vitamin D, especially when we have these lackluster winters with no sunlight and what have you. You can increase these in your food. They're necessary. If you have adequate vitamins in your body, so you're eating a very colorful palette, you're going to see that you can battle fatigue. You're sleeping well, so you don't feel as tired when you wake up. Your working memory is phenomenal, and you're hyper-focused, and you're even keel, ready to go throughout the day. Now, without these vitamins, if you do have a deficiency, there is reason for some people who have these deficiencies, so they don't metabolize it correctly, that they may need an exogenous supplementation for vitamins. One of my friends in particular, she has an injection that she does, I want to say it's like every 6 weeks, that she does for vitamin B12. Because when she doesn't, she has unexplained anger. She's very angry, very aggressive, very wonderful friend. But it's very evident when she hasn't gone and used her vitamin B. And then there's also, with these deficiencies, there's also unexplained fear or paranoia. Do you ever notice that when you haven't slept a while? Okay, so if you haven't slept, what's the first thing you go to? Something has to do with caffeine, usually, right? And then you get the caffeine, and sometimes it has a little bit of those vitamins, but otherwise you're like paranoia straight. Am I going to do well on this test? all of a sudden I'm sweating and I'm anxious and those kind of things. You have this because you don't have, one, the sleep that is necessary, but you don't have the food that you should be intaking, the nutrient value that you should be eating. You're going to see some increased fear for literally no reason at all. And when we forget to sleep, we also forget to eat. It's not normal for people to not sleep for 4 hours and wake up and they're like, I'm going to have a feast. And it's going to include apples and pears and berries and spinach and what have you. That's not what you're thinking of. You're like, I just need to get home and I'm going to chug this monster before I go into my class and then hopefully make it home before I pass out. Just to give you guys the research on this so I can talk about it all day, but like we're actually looking at deficiencies of vitamin C having changes or showing that there are changes in personality due to these deficiencies. And that is what happens with a lot of these nutrients. A deficiency in these nutrients can cause some severe attitude changes. Severe attitude changes. With all that being said, I gave you the spiel. We talked about 1,000,004 nutrients. Not 1,000,004, that's exaggerating. Those are excessive neurons firing right now. We talked about a lot of nutrients, right? But one of the biggest pitfalls that we get to when we're talking about mental health is this battle of the macros. If I just told you that fat is really good for you and carbs are really good for you, why are ketogenic researchers and carb researchers battling? Well, I'm going to kind of elucidate on that a little bit. One of these reasons is because metabolic health and cognitive decline go hand in hand. So subjective cognitive decline tends to be present in diseases with metabolic impairments. All of these are showcasing a decrease in neuroplasticity, as we talked about, the ability to change as a result of experience. But inadequate energy metabolism in the body means inadequate brain function. If you have inadequate energy metabolism in the rest of your body, including your gut, you're going to have inadequate energy metabolism in your brain. Ultimately, even when the cases where the main antagonist is decreased brain functions, you will absolutely be able to find that there is a metabolic parameter associated with that, whether or not it is initiating the actual bout of depression or initiating the decreased focus, or it's just exacerbating it. Metabolic inability to utilize energy components, it has a huge factor on mental health, and that is why there is so much research right now on looking at what the best quote-unquote dietary recommendation is for these types of ailments. So to justify our angst on why dietary interventions are not the target therapy for mental health, we're going to first take a look at one of the highlighted targets in research today, which is depression. Major depression facts. So we are looking at an estimate, 5% of adults suffer from depression. This is an estimate. This doesn't include the people that are tough as nails and don't want to tell you about things going on. This doesn't include the misdiagnosed. This doesn't include any of that. This isn't just an estimation. 5%. Depression is the leading cause of disability worldwide. More women are affected by depression than men. Poor metabolic health, as we just talked about, significantly increases risk. Currently, the psychotherapy interventions are associated with clinically significant decreases, which is awesome. We have psychotherapy that is decreasing depressive symptoms, but only in half of the people enrolled in them. Only in half. Medications such as selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors and tricyclic antidepressants are associated with anxiety, decreased libido, nausea, insomnia. Now, aside from nausea, we're not even looking at a cart before the horse. We're looking at 2 carts and no horse. We are now giving somebody a medication for a mental health issue and giving them another mental health issue, whether it be anxiety, decreased libido, insomnia. We aren't helping the cause any. Doesn't make much sense, does it? Just to, put a nail on the coffin here, this paper found that there is changes in insulin resistance, and they're saying it very kindly, but there was an increase in insulin resistance following antidepressant treatment. So these people have depression, they are being given a pharmacological measure, and it is increasing insulin resistance, which we know is the driver for glucose, which helps to have a metabolically, I would say, healthy status, right? That helps to mitigate some of those mental health issues. And we're seeing that it is only maybe helping their depression, but increasing their insulin resistance, which over time will then decrease their cerebral energy intake. In this study, we're on the opposite side of this. So now this medication induced hypoglycemia. So now we don't have just a resistance where we're not utilizing that vehicle of insulin. Now we just don't have glucose. So there is no energy maintenance whatsoever across these medications. And this one, these are children with antidepressants that are given antidepressants who are now at the risk for type 2 diabetes as children who haven't even formulated or gotten their metabolic systems in order yet, let alone their hormonal and their mental and cognitive health. So now we're giving them depression medicine and just throwing a wrench in their metabolic status. And just one more, another antidepressants with an increased risk in type 2 diabetes. Now, most nutrition studies examining the effects of depression are only focused on a single nutrient. And how many nutrients do we just talk about that have something to do with brain health? A lot of them, right? So if we just focus on amino acids or an amino acid, we focus on GABA, we just focus on tryptophan, we only focus on omega-3s, it's not going to help us at all. We need to look for the entire composition of the food that we eat. So one mechanism of cognitive decline is the reduced ability to utilize glucose to the brain and decreased brain network stability. Now this can start, decreased glucose utilization in the brain can start in a healthy person at age 47. So this is a person with no mental health issues, no cognitive decline, nothing wrong with them. At 47, they will still start to see a decrease in glucose utilization. As I told you, you need that first initiation on the lawnmower before you get that lawnmower to go anywhere, right? Well, ketones are a different story. Ketones are actually dose dependent. So where glucose in the brain is like a lawnmower that you have to start first and then mow your lawn, ketones are like having, a phone and a wireless charger. There are, apparently those people got the letter, the Hogwarts, that I did not, whoever created that, because you just put your phone up against the wireless charger and all of a sudden there is energy shifting over, right? There's nothing to plug in. There is nothing to turn on. All of a sudden, you just set it close to it, and it starts charging. Ketones are the same exact way. They're able to jump over the blood-brain barrier into the brain, and in a dose-dependent response, be able to be utilized by the brain, and they are not affected by aging. They're not affected by cognitive decline like glucose is. So one particular way to avoid added detriment to metabolic health, and specifically the thwarted glucose metabolism, it is potentially a reduction in carbohydrate intake. And you can kind of see on the screen behind me, these are different studies. Now you can see some of these studies are much older, but as I told you, the research out there for an entire diet affiliated with depression, an entire diet affiliated with cognitive decline is very rare. We're only looking at small different particles of certain diets or small different minerals. It doesn't really help us when there are much more, there are greater interventions that we could be actually using. So I'd love to stand up here today and talk to you about all the ketogenic research or the research that is happening with depression and mental health, but we're just scratching the surface. So ideally in the next few years, we'll have a lot of these questions answered, but until then, at least we kind of understand some of the intricacies to an entire diet that is devoted to mental health status. One last thing I will say is researchers are exploring the correlation between sugar and depression and have theorized that a protein called brain-derived neurotropic factor may be the link here. So BDNF plays a huge role in maintenance, growth, differentiation, and the sugar actually decreases BDNF activity. If you have adequate BDNF in your system, so brain-derived neurotropic factor, you're going to see increases in cerebral blood flow, increase in cognitive function, synaptic plasticity, neurogenesis, but a decrease in inadequate amount of BDNF will increase neuronal degradation, increase depression, hippocampal atrophy, and decrease energy regulation because BDNF actually plays a role in the should I eat or should I not eat part of our brain. Now, I definitely threw a lot at you there, lots of things to take in. Like I said, this is about an entire diet, not just one molecule, not just one metabolite. So our key takeaways: protein and amino acids increase neurotransmitter activity. Minerals are super assistants with brain reactions. Complex carbohydrates help with brain energy and mood regulations. Refined carbohydrates are not very great. Fats and ketone bodies are dose dependent, so we can use those even if there is a glucose utilization block. Pharmacological therapies may have a detrimental role in energy metabolism, which also will have a pleiotropic effect in mental health. And our favorite, BDNF, is a regulator of neural function, but also in metabolism. It's funny how all of these things coincide and how they all work out. So guys, that is your food for thought. Does anyone have any questions? No? Okay. I think we're good? All right. Lovely. Can I just unplug this?
Yeah, so we're going to go ahead and transition to the next speaker.
Okay.
While that's happening, if you guys need to use the restroom or get coffee, get some water, please feel free to do so. We're going to meet back down here, say like 12:35, like exactly.
Hi. Sorry. I saw my time and I was like, shit. I was like, go faster.
No, that was
Thanks.
great. That was
Thank you.
amazing.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks. Oh.
Do you have battery?
Battery?
Oh, wait.
Got a decade. Okay, so my Gujral. Yeah. Oh, thank you.
And then that clicks.
Okay, awesome.
Okay, I didn't know if you had battery.
Yeah, I mean, you can use the resident PC that runs on all these.
Oh, there we go.
There's a USB reader somewhere in here.
Well, just
Yeah.
That works, it's easier, but
Okay, awesome. Okay. Gujral. Yep. So it's like an ooh sound and then roll. Yeah, Gujral. Yeah. I know. It's just like. Uh-huh.
plug mine in and we just add it to your Are you planning on staying around here, or you want to walk across the front of it all?
Yeah, I'll probably walk across a little bit.
That's fine. That microphone is just for the camera.
Oh,
So
oh.
if you think you can project loud enough into the room,
Uh-huh.
It's not that big of a room, so you're probably okay if you think
Uh-huh.
you can. You don't need to wear an additional mic. If you're close to this one, it'll pick you up pretty good. If you want, you can also wear that lav mic as well for that's linked to the house speakers.
Oh,
It's
okay.
a little bit clunky, but we were trying to fix it. There was a little bit of issues earlier, but
Okay.
so, whatever you prefer. At least wear that one, which is good.
Mm-hmm.
And then this one will be live if you want to stay around here, or if you want to walk, you can use that, or just be loud. But
Okay.
That's kind of up to
Here,
you.
I guess I'll wear both, just to be safe.
Sure.
Because I do like to just like, move around
Yeah,
and
it's
use
a
my
little bit-
hands and stuff.
It's a little
Yeah.
bit clunky, but it'll work. So thank you.
Okay. All right, and I have to turn this on. Well, I'm not yet, but okay.
Yeah, it's
When we
muted
get
on
to
here
the.
as well, but
Okay. Cool. Hold on 1 second. I'm gonna unhide this. Mm-hmm. Awesome. All right. Oh, presenter view. Okay, awesome. And this is the clicker, huh? Let's see how this works. Does this work?
connected to this USB.
Oh, I don't have a USB on my thing.
There was a USB-C adapter.
Do you have a USB adapter for Mac I don't know what she had was an adapter. Sorry, do you have the connector for the Mac? You have that one, okay. Oh, that's for HDMI, okay. No, it's just for the clicker. It's fine, I won't use a clicker. Yeah, that's fine. That's totally fine. Not a biggie. I know, these Macs are so annoying. Like this, I just got this, and so it's like, without USB, it's annoying. Yeah.
USB-C is nice, but there's so many things that haven't transitioned yet that it's, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Oh, it's just playing. Okay, let me end my show and wait. Okay. Let me pause it. Maybe I'll just do that. That's good. Awesome. Oh, it just automatically goes. That's fine.
I think if you click out of the slideshow,
Yeah.
and then the use timings, if you click that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, and then I'll pause it.
Hopefully.
All right, we'll see. All right. Uh-huh.
Alright, this mic is unmuted, so if you get
Oh.
on, but
Okay.
Dr. Gujral is a licensed clinical neuropsychologist and health psychologist with a special training in conducting prolonged exercise-based interventions in populations with mental health symptoms, with a focus specifically on depression. She serves as an assistant professor of psychiatry at the University of Pittsburgh School of Medicine, and her clinical translational research program targets cognition, emotional health, and brain health in those with depression and cognitive impairment in life, specifically later in life, incorporating markers of physical and brain health along with clinical symptomatology, suicide risk, and neurocognitive function. The primary goal of her current research is to understand the optimal dose parameters of exercise and how exercise works for promoting mental well-being, especially among that older population, older adults. So please give a warm welcome for Dr.
Thank you. Can everyone hear me? Okay. All right. Well, the last speaker set me up so well for this talk because I feel like nutrition and exercise, as we all, I'm sure, agree, are counterparts, right? And so I'll be talking about exercise interventions or exercise training for emotional wellness today. And so you all have heard through multiple platforms and even popular media, right, that exercise is great for your mental health. There's even international societies really dedicated to this, like the International Society for Sports Psychiatry. It's not just about mental health symptoms in athletes, but it's really about using exercise-based approaches for mental health symptoms in the community. And then we know through ACSM, there's so much support for exercise as medicine. So really getting primary care providers to prescribe exercise for mental health diagnoses. This has been a huge push that's been met with a lot of resistance, particularly in the US. But if you go look in Europe, people are doing this. Doctors are prescribing exercise for depression, which is what we want to see. So exercise affects so many aspects of mental health, but I'm just going to touch on a few of them, including cognitive function, stress, depression, anxiety, PTSD or post-traumatic stress disorder, and has a powerful effect on sleep. Though each of these could be a talk on its own, so I'm just going to be doing broad brush strokes today. All right, so Before we delve further into the talk, I just want to bring to your awareness the issues we're grappling with most in the field of exercise for mental health right now. And that is that we all know one size does not fit all when it comes to exercise, right? So we're trying to understand who benefits from what type of exercise, how often do you have to do it, for how many minutes, for how many months, and what symptoms are you affecting with different types of exercise. And you know, articles come out sometimes that say exercise does not benefit cognitive function, but really it's all about heterogeneity or differences in exercise response, and we need to better understand who's benefiting from what. So I just want you to go into this talk with that lens, that's kind of where we're at in the field. We know it benefits mental health, brain health, but we need to better understand, like, how can we prescribe it? Like, how can we use a personalized medicine approach when it comes to exercise? Okay, so my research focuses a lot on understanding the mechanisms of how exercise influences brain health in people with mental health symptoms. But again, that could be a talk on its own, and it's not the focus of this talk. So I'm going to touch the tip of the iceberg, and you know, the previous speaker kind of set us up for this, but I'll talk from the exercise perspective. Exercise training influences brain plasticity. So it influences the growth of new neurons, new neuronal connections, new blood vessels, increases blood flow in the brain, increases BDNF, that you know, important factor we talked about when it came to nutrition. And what does all of that do? It improves our learning ability, improves our coping skills, improves our ability to regulate our own behaviors and emotions in the context of distress, and also just be more confident as people, right? Like, if we're coping better, we're going to feel better about ourselves. So that's kind of the broad brushstroke. I wasn't planning on going into this, but because we talked a little bit about biology, I thought, you know what, let's just at least show you the model of some of the biological and behavioral mechanisms through which exercise may affect mental health. There's a lot of bubbles here, but really, you know, the mechanisms that we know of is exercise training influences our fitness, right? It reduces inflammation in our body and our brain, improves our metabolic function, and that affects things like growth factors, like BDNF we talked about. There's another one, vascular endothelial growth factor, VEGF, or insulin growth factor, IGF. It influences, decreases our vascular risk. If you have vascular risk factors, you know, improves those, improves endothelial function, and then, you know, ultimately all of these middle bubbles are all about brain plasticity, improves neurotransmitter function, and then, you know, thereby improves our mental health. And really it is in a regionally specific manner in the brain that exercise influences, focused on the hippocampus or the medial temporal lobe and the prefrontal cortex, which again, we won't touch on too much today, but happy to answer questions about it afterwards. And talking about biological mechanisms is not without talking about behavioral mechanisms, which I believe the next speaker is going to be talking a lot more about. But I just want you to know that exercise training, you know, affects our sense of self, our sense of confidence, our self-efficacy, helps us regulate better, right? So we're regulating our emotions better. We are thinking more flexibly, able to inhibit our automatic impulses to ruminate or to not follow through on our goals, and that improves our mental health. Okay, so what does the National Physical Activity Guidelines, the latest 2018 report, have to say about exercise effects on brain health? Well, this is what the evidence shows across the lifespan. So exercise benefits cognition in children, adults, and older adults. And here we're talking mostly about habitual exercise. You can see on the table where acute exercise also has a benefit. Exercise influences quality of life in adults. Exercise influences or reduces depressed mood, risk for depression, relapse in depression in children, adults, and older adults. It also reduces anxiety. Like acute exercise has an effect on state anxiety, as well as exercise training has an effect on, has a benefit for anxiety disorders. And exercise has a powerful effect on sleep, sleep efficiency, sleep latency, sleep quality, a bunch of different aspects of sleep, which I'm not going to focus too much on today because it's a really heavy and deep topic. All right, so let's delve deeper. So that was kind of giving you an overview of like exercise effects on brain health, but let's delve deeper into different age groups now. So exercise effects on mental health in children. So what have we learned the most about? Well, hot off the press, meta-analysis of 21 studies and about 2,500 children showed that physical activity interventions have a small to moderate benefit for depressive symptoms in children and adolescents. So I'm going to orient you to this figure here because I'm going to be showing a lot of meta-analyses today, so I want you to understand what this means. So here, negative is good because we want lower depressive symptoms. And so, so we see that the final overall sort of total effect of exercise on depressive symptoms here is about a negative 0.3 effect. That's like bordering between a small and moderate effect. But what you also see from this figure is there is a lot of variability across these intervention studies, right? And so we need to understand that. What's causing that heterogeneity? So when they took a closer look, they found that adolescents are the ones who benefit the most, and those who had clinically significant depressive symptoms benefited the most. And how much physical activity, so what sort of physical activity parameters were meaningful? 3 times a week, interventions that were 3 times a week, and actually less than or equal to 12 weeks. And so I found that interesting, and part of that could just be that people stop adhering as much after 12 weeks, and so like you see less benefit because of that, but that's kind of what the data showed. And interestingly, there were no sex differences in the physical activity effects on depressive symptoms, though we know that girls have a higher prevalence of depressive symptoms in childhood and adolescence. Okay, so this one slide could be a talk all in itself. There's over 400 studies looking at physical activity benefits for cognition in children and adolescents alone. And physical activity interventions have shown small to moderate benefits for cognitive performance in children and adolescents. A lot of the work has been done in populations at risk, whether that's children with ADHD or obesity, and they show benefit. People look at both cognitive testing when it comes to different aspects of your thinking and memory. That's called neuropsychological testing. And then they also look at academic achievement testing. Now, the data from the neuropsychological testing that shows how your brain processes work, that data is more consistent. And the data on academic achievement is a little bit more mixed in terms of physical activity benefits. But I really like this study over here on the left that shows it's in about 200 children and adolescents, and they showed a dose-response effect of physical activity on both executive functioning, which is an aspect of cognitive function, I'll explain in a minute, and academic achievement when it came to math. Now, executive functioning is an umbrella term that's used for a bunch of different cognitive processes that are important for our day-to-day functioning. So this includes things like problem solving, planning, organization, thinking flexibly, setting goals, being able to inhibit automatic responses and switch between tasks effectively, being able to adapt. So this is an important area of thinking I'm going to keep coming back to because physical activity or exercise has a powerful effect on this particular area of thinking, which is good news for us because it helps us function better. All right. Mental health benefits of exercise in adults, where most of the work has been done. Well, you know, given that you all are college students, and I thought it would be good to bring your attention to a college-age study. This is a cross-sectional study, but it really brings our attention to sex differences as something we should think about when we design exercise interventions and how it affects our mood and sleep. So in this study, there was 866 college students, about 40% women, about 20 years old, and they found that those who were exercising per the National Physical Activity Guidelines on a weekly basis, those people had earlier bedtimes, more positive affect, less anxiety, less anger. Now, when they looked at it, you know, split by men and women, they found greater and different, somewhat different effects on mood and sleep in women than they did in men. In women, they found that exercise led to earlier bedtimes, improved sleep quality, increased positive affect, and less depressed mood. Men also said they had less depressed mood and less daytime dysfunction. In this sample, one of the issues was that women were reporting more symptoms to begin with. So maybe there was more to benefit from, you know, from the exercise in the first place. But it also speaks to that, you know, that there may be sex differences in the way exercise influences our mental health. All right. So exercise is an effective treatment for depression. So this is my area of research. I've been working on this for about a decade. Feel really passionately about exercise as an independent treatment for depression. And this table kind of shows you why. So if you look in the third column from the left, it says effect size. So you can see that the numbers for exercise are pretty similar to medication-based treatments and the leading psychotherapies. These are the first-line treatments for depression. Now, a meta-analysis, like a Cochrane review from 2013, showed that exercise is comparable. It's you know, just as good as these other treatments. And it's also free. It can be free, right? You can just go out and exercise for a walk, and it improves your whole health. So why not do something that's going to have long-term benefits, improve your whole health, and be just as good as the other ones? All right. So there has been a fair amount of work showing the anxiolytic effects of exercise, so that exercise can benefit anxiety disorders and symptoms of anxiety in the community. This work is a little bit less convincing than the depression field, so I would not recommend exercise as a first-line treatment for anxiety, but it's great as an adjunct. I mean, it can only help. So it has a moderate beneficial effect for symptoms of anxiety, but a smaller benefit than for depression. All right. I thought it would be interesting and needed to bring in that, hey, there's different types of exercise. It's not one thing. So there was this recent network meta-analysis comparing different types of exercise and what is it most beneficial for. So based on this network meta-analysis, it seems like people who have depressive symptoms benefit most from having a multimodal exercise program, both aerobic and anaerobic. So like a combination of aerobic and strength training. Also, a multimodal program seems good for negative symptoms of schizophrenia, and what those are like catatonic behavior, like basically, you know, like not moving, just being, you know, more still and sedentary, quiet, which kind of mirrors depression in some ways, right? And then more mind-body exercises like yoga and Tai Chi seem to be really specifically good for symptoms of post-traumatic stress. which is interesting. And I'm actually working on a study looking at that right now on yoga benefits compared to sort of light walking. And then strength training seems to be really good for anxiety as well as for positive symptoms of schizophrenia, which are delusions and hallucinations and that sort of thing. So this is really interesting. Again, we're at the tip of the iceberg in learning about what's good for what, but this is at least a preliminary look. All right, so let's get into older adults. This is my, bread and butter, so I work in geriatrics. This is a meta-analysis of exercise effects on depression in older adults. And you see about a 1 standard deviation, which is a pretty large effect on depressive symptoms in older adults with exercise training. And it's not, and what seems to be the best when it comes to exercise training for depression in older people, combination, so mixed aerobic and anaerobic interventions that are moderate intensity, that are group-based, that have some supervised, some unsupervised sessions, and seems to be most beneficial for people who are not really clinically complicated with a lot of other comorbidities, which you may expect. All right, so exercise effects on cognition in older adults. This is a huge field in itself, and this is an older study or meta-analysis that I'm presenting here, but it's a seminal paper in our field of exercise benefits for cognitive function in older adults. It's based on 18 exercise intervention studies that were targeting cognitive function in community-dwelling, healthy older adults. And what you can see here, with exercise being the white bar, controls being the gray bar, is that it benefits all these areas of cognitive function. It benefits numerous areas of thinking and memory. And what you also see on the left side is that it has the greatest effect for executive function, which we just talked about. Oh, this is based on cognitively healthy older adults, and I don't have the time to talk about older adults who have cognitive impairment, like mild cognitive impairment and dementia. The data is a little less convincing, but it does benefit cognition in those with mild cognitive impairment. And in dementia, the effects are smaller, and also it's harder to study, but there seems to be some benefit, even if it's modest. Well, we've talked a lot about different types of exercise. Now, does intensity matter? So I think this is an interesting question that we do have to address. So a recent meta-analysis of 58 randomized trials in the general population showed that high-intensity interval training had some unique benefits for mental health. So this, it showed that it had an overall benefit for mental well-being, kind of more generally, as well as for depressive symptoms, but not for anxiety symptoms, at least per this meta-analysis. And what's cool is that high-intensity interval training was better than active controls, which was a moderate continuous training for overall mental well-being, which suggests that intensity does matter to some extent. All right, so what about our own individual level factors like our age, our sex, our sociodemographic, and our genetic makeup? So our genetic makeup influences our overall health, our brain health, our mental health, and we don't talk a lot about it. So we talked about BDNF in the last talk and this talk. So there is a genetic polymorphism. So that is, there's a particular allele where people make less BDNF if they have this risk allele, okay? And this allele has been linked to more depressive symptoms, worse cognitive function, and because it seems like exercise works on brain health through influencing BDNF, we want to know if people who are making less BDNF, how is it affecting them if they're doing an exercise intervention? And then APOE, apolioprotein, there's this E4 allele in that gene that has a really high detrimental risk for dementia as well as for depression. And we want to know if you get these people exercising who have this risk allele, is it going to be better, worse, or the same for them? So these are two genes that have been studied a lot in the context of exercise and cognition and mental health. So I'm going to talk very briefly about some of my own work that's in collaboration with a colleague, Belinda Brown at University of Murdoch in Australia. It's called the Intense Physical Activity and Cognition Trial. So the parent study, the overall trial, was designed to look at high intensity exercise versus moderate continuous training versus a no contact control group on cognitive function, and look at how genetic factors modulate the effect of exercise on cognition. So here's what they found in the parent study, and then I'm going to talk about my study, what I looked at. They found a dose-dependent effect of exercise on fitness change, which is what you'd expect, right? More intense exercise over the same amount of time, you're going to see greater fitness change. They did not see a direct effect of exercise on cognition in this study, but they did see that the APOE4 allele, so people who have that allele, again, are at higher risk for bad outcomes like dementia and depression. They found that the E4 carriers who had greater fitness change were the ones who showed greater cognitive benefit. So if your brain was more vulnerable, exercise had a greater benefit for you, which is cool. They also found moderation by the BDNF risk allele in the opposite direction. So we said these people aren't making as much BDNF in their brain, right, if they have this risk allele, and exercise works through influencing BDNF. So if you had this risk allele, you weren't benefiting as much from exercise. So you did not show as much global cognition change. So basically, the MET carriers are the blue line, and the non-MET, so that's the risk allele. The blue line are the people at risk. They did not show global cognitive change with fitness change. They did not show memory change, and they did not show executive function change. Again, kind of pointing to this idea that if your body's not able to make as much BDNF, even exercise is struggling to change that BDNF and may not be able to affect your cognition as well. Okay, so I did a sub-study or a secondary analysis based on this, focused on emotional health. So does intensity matter, and do genetic factors modify the exercise response for emotional health in this same study context? So it was about 100 community-dwelling older adults, not engaged in high-intensity exercise, cognitively normal, don't have psychiatric disorders per se. It was 6 months, 50-minute cycling intervention twice a week, led by a exercise physiologist. So the high-intensity condition was a warm-up plus 1-minute intervals of high-intensity training with 2 minutes of active recovery, repeated. And then the moderate intensity continuous training was a constant intensity of 50 to 60% aerobic capacity, and then there was a no contact control. Our primary mental health outcomes were depression, anxiety, and stress, so perceived stress. We used regression models, and we were interested in looking at exercise intensity effects on these mental health outcomes and whether genetic factors moderated that. We didn't find any main effect of exercise intensity on emotional health outcomes at all in this study. But we did find that APOE4 carrier status moderated the effect of exercise on perceived stress. So I'm going to walk you through this graph here. So we have high intensity exercise group on the left, moderate intensity exercise in the control. So, and we have the E4 carriers in red. So those are the people, the higher risk group. And we have over here, perceived stress scale, okay? And so this is change. So this is a change in perceived stress over 6 months. And we saw that only the E4 carriers, so the higher risk people in the high intensity exercise group, showed a decline in perceived stress over the course of the 6 months. This was significantly different than the moderate intensity continuous training and significantly different from the control group. And you can see it's kind of like a dose response sort of, if you look at just the red bars here, you know, it really looks beautiful in terms of intensity making a difference on perceived stress. We didn't see the same thing for depressive symptoms or anxiety symptoms in the sample. Could be because of, low level of symptoms to begin with. BDNF did not moderate the effect of exercise in this study. So the findings of this study suggest that both exercise intensity and individual level factors like your genetic makeup make a difference and are important to consider in future intervention studies. So circling back to the benefits of exercise for mental health, we talked about a lot of different things. The green here, cognition, depression, sleep. I didn't talk about sleep a lot, but exercise has powerful effects on sleep. Those show the greatest effects, though all of these show benefits. And we don't have answers for the heterogeneity in exercise response, but based on all the data, seems like, well, everybody benefits, all ages. 2 to 3 times a week seems to be good. At least about 12 weeks seems to be good for your mental health. Do multiple types of exercise if you can. Depression, cognition, and sleep, like I said, seem to benefit most. And, moderate intensity at least is good. High intensity for certain populations may be good. For some populations may not be good. So we still have to further explore that. All right, so now I'm just gonna set you up for the next talk by saying, we just talked about one side of the coin here by talking about how exercise influences emotional health. There's a whole nother relationship, which is how does your emotional health influence your exercise behavior, how your ability to engage in exercise, adhere to an exercise regimen, because if you can't do that, you're not going to get the other benefit, right? And so there's a whole field of research now focused on these predictors, including, your brain-based predictors of how well people exercise. And I've actually published a paper myself focused on exercise self-efficacy, that there are certain brain regions that support your exercise self-efficacy that seem to be predictive of whether someone can adhere to a year-long exercise regimen. Just like to acknowledge, some of my mentors and collaborators. I'm from University of Pittsburgh. I trained with Kirk Erickson, who I think many of you have probably heard of. He's a guru in exercise and cognition and aging. And thank you for the opportunity to speak. All right.
Guys, if you need to go get coffee, water, use the restroom, push your legs, please feel free to do so. Plan to be back in your seats by, let's say, 1:15.
Oh, here, let me give you these. Yeah, that's kind of important, huh?
You could just yell.
Here, I have this one too.
Is there anything I have to know about? I haven't looked at mine yet.
Yeah. Yes, I'm like, I don't know.
It's like tax information. Yeah, okay. So we just have to fill out the top, I assume, or like what? Okay.
You good to go for everything?
Yeah, I think so. I got the mic on, got that mic, so
Okay, you're gonna stay at the podium now?
yeah.
Yeah, sounds good.
I'll wander a bit. That's my tendency, so.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Good to go whenever you think. I don't know how many people went to. Yeah.
All right, guys, we're going to go ahead and get started. I know it's like a minute or two early, but most of y'all seem ready. So just a really quick reminder before I introduce the final speaker for today. Following this talk, we are going to have a panel discussion, a Q&A session, so please have your questions ready to go. For any of the speakers from the morning and this afternoon, we'll have a chance to sit down and talk with them and get some of those answered and hopefully have a really good discussion. We're also going to be doing the raffle tickets in between the last talk and setting up for the panel Q&A, so stay tuned for that. So our final speaker for today is Dr. Zachary Chaplow. Dr. Chaplow is a postdoctoral researcher, lecturer, certified exercise physiologist, and certified strength and conditioning specialist in exercise and behavioral medicine laboratory at The Ohio State University. Dr. Chaplow is dedicated to advancing the science of lifestyle behavior change and establishing the utility of integrating physical weight management in disease prevention and control. His work also addresses health disparities through studying the design and implementation of remotely delivered interventions for rural dwelling populations. So if you guys would join me in welcoming Dr. Zachary Chaplow.
All right. Thank you all. I'll try to make the talk not as boring as my intro. I put a lot of big words in there. I know it's a lot. It's a mouthful. Essentially what I do is I work with behavior change, right? So as Dr. Gujral sort of set up for me, it's adherence, right? So I want you to, as I'm going through this, have an idea in your brain, right, where a dichotomy between compliance and adherence, right? And I won't tell you definitions. I just want you to think about that. What does compliance mean to you? What does adherence mean to you? Okay? Maybe you think of your mother, pointing the finger, compliance versus adherence, okay? All right, so we're going to talk a bit about habit, but more than that, we're going to go beyond habit, right? I'm sure we've all been involved with the habit boom recently, which is, tiny habits, atomic habits. These books are blowing up everywhere. We generally know how to set a habit. What else can we do, all right? Okay, a bit about me, just really briefly. I grew up actually just across the border in Columbiana County. And so it was nice, came up and saw the folks last night and then came over here across the border. So here we are. And I did my undergraduate training at Ohio State, and then they paid me to stay, believe it or not. So I've been there for about 12 years. So it's nice. And if you're interested in coming to campus and seeing what we have to offer as far as exercise science, behavior, psychology, movement sciences, just hit me up afterwards, all right? Okay. So really briefly, take us back. I want to give some context to the talk today. So these four things sort of work in tandem with each other as we're going through the talk, okay? So I want you to keep these in your mind. First is health promotion. Health promotion, all right? Process of enabling people to increase control over and to improve health. Again, compliance, adherence. Compliance, adherence. Process of enabling people, okay? The next, the more that we enable people, the more wellness behavior maybe they will take on and maintain over time. Okay, wellness behavior You know, we talked about nutrition so far, exercise so far. Think of this as any behavior that's beneficial for your wellness, okay? We'll give you a few examples later on. If we keep doing those, right, we saw that dose-response effect in the last one with exercise. That's similar in a lot of these other behaviors. So the more we do that, right, essentially, the more we can hypothetically impact our well-being. I don't know about you, but a lot of people use the word well-being and mental health interchangeably. They're kind of confusing, right? So well-being, right, is basically judging life positively, feeling good, all right, feeling good. And there's different domains, and those different domains are emotional, psychological, and social, and those make up your mental health, okay? So that's some order to this chaos here. And so our mental health has some downstream effects. It affects how we think, feel, and act, right? It also determines how we handle stress, relate to others, and make choices. Okay, also how we judge those choices after we make them, really important. All right. So a little bit more context. Here on the left, I guess you can think of this as a figure of attempting to integrate all things, all these factors related to these domains of well-being and your mental health. It's a really tough task, so this is not an exhaustive list, right? But it sort of shows like they're at the nexus point. Mental health. We should be paying attention to a lot of these things as we're moving forward if our aim is to maintain our mental health or even improve it. On the right, we have a pretty good idea of the general proportions of these factors and what role they play in mental health, right? So one thing you can keep in mind is behavioral patterns like exercise, like diet, like sleep. Okay, they make up a significant minority of that proportion. So, in other words, they're worth focusing on, right? Worth focusing on. I know you know that because you're all exercise science majors, and good for you. Okay? Activity break. I'm an activity guy. I usually let my students walk while I'm lecturing, believe it or not. Activity break. I want you to get your phones out. I'm the only person in your entire lecture career here that's probably asking you to take your phones out. But take your phones out, okay? Take your phones out. I want you to go to Google. I want you to Google this. I want you to Google that. Mental health habits. Mental health habits. Google that. All right. Somebody shout out the first thing that you see. What behavior's first? First thing you saw? Exercise. What's second? What's third? Mindfulness. Okay. What's fourth? Okay. See, we're just rattling that list. So, no shortage of behaviors, right? So when you see that, it says exercise, diet, substance abuse, mindfulness. Does it also show you any information about how to actually do those things? Or does it just say the name? There's drop downs. Good. Yeah, good. Somebody follow the drop down. Does it tell you how to do those things? Or does it? Okay. Effects, right? Effects, yeah. Cool. All right. Keep that in your mind. We're going to come back to it. Did your results, did they look sort of like this on the right? If you're on your phone, at least. People on computers might be different, but okay, cool. Saw some thumbs up. All right, so yeah, there's that list. I want to give you a really valuable piece of information here. This is not mine. This is BJ Fogg. Check him out on YouTube. He's at Stanford. He's the actual guy that published Tiny Habits, and then Atomic Habits was born out of that. And he has a really interesting way of thinking about behaviors. It's called the behavior grid. So over here on the left, all right, so notice on the vertical axis there's dots, there's spans, and there's paths. And they're exactly what they sound like, so I won't tell you anymore. Dots, spans, paths. It means it's a good graphic. That means that you know what it is before you even know the definition, right? There's colors on the horizontal. It's color-coded, right? So green, doing a new behavior. Never done it before. If you've never tried mindful meditation, then you'd be doing a green behavior. If you're doing mindful meditation, ideally, would you want to do it one time and be done? Shake your head no, or shake your head yes. One time and be done? Ideally. No, I see some more no's than yeses. Would you want to do it for a week? Or would you want to do it for the rest of your life? you want to incorporate it into some sort of plan for your life, right? So it's one thing in common with a lot of these behaviors over here on the right is that ideally, right, there's benefit to acute, as we saw in the last talk, and to doing them for spans of time, absolutely. But overall, if we're talking a lifespan, we want to be able to even be able to engage in them at will, right, would be nice, let alone doing them consistently. Okay, so here's how to think about this. The way we promote these behaviors on the right so far and up to this point typically are techniques that are helpful for dot behaviors and span behaviors. Just think about this. The way we promote it, helpful for dot behaviors and span behaviors. What we want to do is move people to this path idea. You can see it down there. Maintain behavior from now on. There's different ways we, as interventionists, right? If you're trying to help your parents, okay, you're the interventionist, right? In that scenario, if you're trying to help yourself, it also works this way. There's different techniques for span behaviors and dot behaviors than there is for a path behavior. So the idea is, how can we move from, if you've never tried mindful meditation, you're going to do it for the first time, tomorrow at noon. Okay, sounds good. You do it then. How can we get that into a path that works for you and integrate it into your life? All right? Really useful way to start thinking about behavior. Okay, briefly, advice. Somebody shout out a piece of advice you've heard lately. Does not have to be health related. Get good sleep is health related and good advice, isn't it? Yep. So there's a definition of advice. Guidance or recommendations offered with regard to prudent future action. They don't tell you how to bridge the gap between advice and action, right? But they do tell you that it's good. Okay, good. So down at the bottom, a phrase, take advice. They expect us to take it. What does take mean? What does take mean? I don't know. Assuming I absorb it like osmosis into my soul. And then all of a sudden I'm a good sleeper, right? So I take advice, which means obtain information and guidance, typically from an expert, okay, whatever that means. You guys are all experts when you go home and talk to your mom or your dad, right, or grandparents, because you came to school when you know everything, right? You're experts. So they expect you to have the advice. Trust me, they'll ask you for it. Okay, what about action, though? And note, here's the gap I was talking about, okay? Action, definition of action. Fact or process of doing something, typically to achieve an aim. He made a vow. He made a vow. The next one. It's an interesting word, a vow, right? Made a vow. Think about that as we move forward here. Okay, so typically, when we teach behavior, we teach it with the dot idea and the span. Do it once or do it for a length of time. Okay? When we do that, we are implying this relationship. We're implying that it seems simple. We give them the advice, and they'll take action. Right? But it's not easy. It's not easy. So it seems simple, but it's not easy. Translating advice into action. Here's one method that's typically used, mostly for dot behaviors, doing them one time. It's called the top-down approach. Other names for this are the writing reflex and an installing change. Okay? You need a new radio in your car. You got the old junker passed down from your older brother, right? You want it to sound good. You want to impress your friends. So you install a new sound system. All of a sudden it sounds better, right? We apply the same sort of analogy to humans. When we know that humans don't work like cars, right? Humans have a lot of biases and a lot of irregularities in how they conduct themselves. So we can't really install change. At the writing reflex, we all have. So we're all a family here. A reflex, right? Think of a reflex. The knee jerk, right? Same thing with the writing reflex. You've probably already experienced this. Your grandma says, I really want to, tighten up my midsection. I don't like how I look in my Sunday dresses, and I want to look better. What do I have to do? And you go, oh, well, diet and exercise. Why do you do that? It's a reflex. They're asking you for advice, and you're providing answers, right? Seems logical. I do it myself. The problem with this is that we can trigger this attitude or this state in people known as ambivalence, right? This is the downstream effect. You provide advice every time somebody asks you. You can trigger this state. It's called ambivalence. Ambivalence is the state of having mixed feelings or contradictory ideas about something or someone. Exercise is good, but it's cold today. I intend to do my mindful breathing tomorrow morning, but it's the first day of spring break. Boy, this bed is warm. There's always tomorrow, right? And that's called the all or nothing approach, or all or nothing mindset, or abstinence violation, if you've heard of that in substance abuse, okay? Which is, I didn't do it this morning when I planned it, I'll just do it tomorrow, right? Rather than engaging right then. Why do people do that? Why do people do that? Could it be related to that we just provide so much advice, maybe not a path? We'll explore that, okay? So here's just a quick example, the WHO physical activity guidelines. Just focus on the two things down there that I've bolded. One says, physical activity, good for mental health, reduce symptoms of anxiety, depression, cognitive health, sleep. Doing some is better than none. Doing some is better than none. And then what do they say? The S word. Should. Adults should start by doing small amounts of physical activity and gradually increasing the frequency, intensity, duration over time. Why in the world would they say do small amounts? Right? Why would they do that? Why would they say that? What's the theory behind that? Why is breaking something down into smaller bits, why does that make it easier to start? They don't tell you, but we'll get to that. Here's how that's working. Okay, here's how that's working. Emerging adults, pretty active, but even the males, which are slightly higher than females there in that group at least, 40% are adhering to these guidelines, so getting their 150 to 180 MVPA minutes a week and their 2-time strength training sessions a week. Okay, average for all adults 18 and over, we're looking at mid-20s, a quarter. So maybe it's barriers, not just advice. Like advice is good, we need to learn how to take it. Maybe it's barriers. We have way too many barriers. Shout out the number one barrier. Anybody know? Say it. I heard it. Time, yes, it is. Time, always. Always time. Always time, in any way. Time because I'm busy or time because whatever, my favorite show's on, it's always time. But here's some other ones. Notice it's in a cloud. There's no order to this, just like, I have this plan and anything's going to pop up and make me get in the way and be a barrier. And I don't know what to do after that happens. So some really smart people tried to make sense of this. And so they came up with this thing called the COM-B model. It's actually a small part of a larger framework. But what it does, and please use this on yourself today and use it on your family members tomorrow. Okay, COM-B, capability, opportunity, and motivation. Capability, opportunity, motivation. What this is a way to categorize barriers. Let me go back one slide. Okay, let's say social support, but without knowing anything further. Capability, motivation, or opportunity. Where would you put social support in there? It may be more than one place. Shout one out. In opportunity, in capability, or in motivation category. Motivations, yep, definitely part of motivation. Social support, if you're doing it with friends. What else? Could it be considered an opportunity or a capability? Maybe it's a skill of learning how to procure social support. Okay, so they have some further detail on this. This is actually from another study in specifically mental health. So these are barriers and facilitators to taking part in a program to help you improve your mental health. Sounds intriguing, right? When they gave you the flyer for this talk, you're going to learn a lot, right? You're like, oh, okay, yeah, but in the back of your mind, you're like, oh, it's Saturday, But you're here, so you did that, right? So this is the same idea, but with mental health programs, going and taking part in a program. Some barriers we can see there are in bold and facilitators underlined. There are subdomains, 2 subdomains per capability, opportunity, motivation. Check this out. All right. So we said social support has to do with motivation. There's 2 types of motivation. It's in pink and purple up there, southwest corner. Reflective, which is what we all think of as motivation, and automatic. Those are like impulses, right? Subliminal messaging, those 1-second Super Bowl ads that pop up and it's just tasty food, right? Okay, so within that, we see some further facilitators and barriers, like self-efficacy within reflective motivation. Self-efficacy is belief or confidence in one's ability to enact a behavior under a various amount of circumstances, negative and positive, okay? There it is. So we can place that in the reflective motivation. If somebody doesn't have, much belief in themselves, that can be a real barrier. So maybe we focus our energy on that instead of just giving them advice. That's just a really, really brief example, okay? Typically, you'll string together all of these, and that's what they did here. They have all domains, and they're going to focus on these things moving forward. Okay, like I said, these things work together. Let's say you address all these barriers, capability barriers, opportunity barriers, motivation barriers. What that does over time is it helps people build a strong intention. Intention is exactly as it sounds. We don't need the definition for it. Strong intention. It has magnitude. It has direction, as you see by the arrows, right? It also has degree. Or is my intention based on some outside force, or is it based on my internal self? Those tend to be a little stronger, right? Am I doing it because my friends are doing it, or am I doing it because I want to do it, right? So intention's a multi-dimensional construct, but regardless, capability, opportunity, and motivation work together to set that intention. For the longest time, all of the models, if you've taken courses on social cognitive theory, trans-theoretical model, self-determination theory, theory of planned behavior, the most proximal determinant to behavior is intention. Meaning, if you have a strong intention, you're going to do the behavior. Okay, but what happened with my breathing that I told myself? I was going to do breathing today, wasn't I? And I said it was cold. So it's just my intention wasn't strong enough, right? I just need to do more motivation, right? Just more motivation. That'll be enough. Maybe not. So we have this idea of habits. Here's where we bring this full circle. So habits are having their shining moment right now. Habits are really cool. You can sort of hack your body on the left here, right? You have a trigger. As long as that trigger is in your environment, right? It supposedly triggers a behavior. Every time I'm tired, I reach for coffee. Madison talked about that, right? Maybe it makes me anxious. Therefore, that wouldn't be a good habit loop because it needs to feel good. It needs to feel good. That's a habit loop. Seems kind of simple. Kind of simple, right? Notice the behaviors. Drinking coffee. Is it exercise? Is it diet? Don't you gotta get in your car, drive to the store, buy the food, have the money to buy the food, pick the right foods, load the food, bring the food home, unload the food, cook the food, eat the food, pack the food, eat it again. That's a lot of steps, okay? All right? So habits sort of moved in this direction. This is the BMAP model. This is another example. They've added in, it's not just motivation and a prompt, right? Like that trigger in the environment. I put my shoes in front of the door, I trip over them, so I have to exercise. It's not just the trigger, it also has ability down there. So it implies that the easier we make something to do, here's where the who is coming from, right? Make exercise very easy. Do a 10-minute bout. Right now, go, boom, right? Why? Because it's under this principle. The easier you make it to do, the less motivation you need, and you only need a tiny trigger, okay? Only need a tiny trigger. All right, so still though, there's more to this beyond linking advice to action, intention to action, especially repeated action. Okay, let's look at that too. Disadvantages of habit. I already mentioned these so we'll just do them briefly. It's dependent on these prompts, obviously, right? Depend on the prompt. If you don't have your shoes in front of the door, you're just going to walk right out the door. That's what it implies. Lifestyle behaviors are complex. We just said that. And then here's your thing I know you're all still thinking about. It's like, what does this guy mean? Compliance, or just do it, Nike, and adherence, okay? All right. So there's this long-standing tradition in psychology that's now spilled over into exercise and lifestyle change, which is the intention-action gap, also known as the intention-behavior gap. So this is that idea, bridging advice to action, bridging your own within yourself. I am resolute. I make a vow to exercise today at 5 p.m. I'm going to be tired from this talk. It was early talk, and I have a long drive, and right. So how do I do that? So not just habit, we have other ways to do this. I love this article title. This isn't my article, but I've always just admired it, right? Why we don't just do it. Understanding lifestyle and behavior gap, okay. Cool. There's 3 ways that the literature converges around outside of habits. So stick with me here. This is the bread and butter. 1, focus on regulatory processes. Both previous speakers talked about this, and I love it, right? So regulation has an automatic element, right? How we regulate our emotions. It also has a behavioral element. So check this out. Here's one of the main ways, okay? Stress reactivity, specifically anxiety reactivity. So these feelings of, here's a good example. Somebody knows that they're at risk for a heart attack. You take them into the gym. First time exercising, they start feeling short of breath. And they say, nope, I'm done, right? That's stress reactivity. Okay, so there are techniques we can use. A lot of them are used in CBT, for example. But there's plenty of techniques you can use as a layperson, okay, that help people to manage their anxiety sensitivity, which is back to this, biopsychosocial model of what mental health is. That might help us on the biological front to meet some of those barriers. Next, social support. Thank you, Madison, right? That's motivational. It's motivational. It sure is. It also helps us address barriers, all to do with that green circle there. Okay? Now, again, we wouldn't want to just tell someone to make connections, right? We need to help them make connections, empower them to make connections, give them options, okay? These 2 are really cool. All right? Episodic future thinking is exactly what it sounds like, imagining the future. Didn't we all do that as kids? Why do we stop? Right? Episodic future thinking. They actually bring people in, they have them write their story down or tell their story on camera, right? And what this does is it sets a path for you. Where do I want to go? Who do I want to be? Am I doing a behavior that's aligned with that or not? And then when you bring your attention to that, you can actually have something to solve. You might solve it behaviorally. So you can think of the future thinking as sort of cognitive, but here's the cognitive-behavioral connection. So a lot of what I do with my folks, I help them self-monitor. That's tracking yourself, right? Keeping track of yourself. MyFitnessPal's a great tool, but you can just leave off the Dairy Queen ice cream cake you had last night, right? So it requires that we have the ability to be honest and truthful. Smart goal setting and idea problem solving. Those are all the behavioral elements of this. And they all sort of interact, right? They all interact. So 1, focus on regulatory processes. This just straight up self-determination theory. We've known this for a long time. The more people self-regulate, the more you move from, the purpose of the behavior is to gain the rewards and punishments, right? To gain the rewards of exercise. I want to look good this summer at the beach, okay? Or do I want to look good and I like doing it? I'm going to keep doing it, even if it's raining and cold, right? Even if I'm tired. I'm going to do it because it satisfies me in a deeper way. And that's what I mentioned before. That moves that locus of control internally. Okay, real quick on cognitive function, executive function. Did a great job overviewing this already today, but this is how this all interacts, right? Self-regulation, top right over there, at least the automatic part they're talking about in this diagram, feeds forward, and you follow this arrow over here to the left, helps you inhibit environmental and internal distractions. We all have phones, I know, because I saw you pull them out at the beginning, right? Some of you are on them, right? Full of distraction. They're like distraction machines. Okay, so it helps you manage that, right? And that feeds forward again to help you maintain it, which is what I'm concerned about, helping people maintain. And look, that interacts with our cognitive flexibility or ability to right the wrongs and then move forward into the behavioral domain I just talked about, helping you to know, hey, this behavior isn't aligned with who I am. I need to reason that. I need to problem solve that. I plan for that, right? And be flexible when the things don't work. Don't give up. All right, disadvantages of this, though. Really, really effortful, cognitive heavy. There's some automatic elements of it, but I'm specifically talking about this part, right? You have to have high motivation, right? High opportunity, according to Susan Michi in the COM-B model, right? If you have low opportunity, you have no time, you're so planned and so busy, and you have no motivation, it's even harder for you. Like if I'm your instructor and I'm asking you to turn in your homework, and your homework was to track your food last night, but you didn't have the motivation or the opportunity, it's really, really hard to get yourself to do that. It's taxing. It's taxing. So that's where habit has one on us, right? Habit's supposedly automatic, all right? But when we blend the two, habit and executive function, you know, it really works together. And when we do that and we internalize that process, we know it's not going to be easy, and we know that we can set ourselves up to have habits. What we can focus on then is accepting and internalizing. This is the second point that helps us bridge that gap that the literature converges around. Internalization is acceptance of a value regulation style. It's associated with greater autonomy, funnily enough, right? Back to self-determination theory. It's also associated with this host of other great things. Okay, here's your basic needs we've known forever and ever. Relatedness. Relatedness. I want to feel part of a group. My peers, who are they? Are they helping me or are they against me? Do I have enough competition? Am I rising to that? Competence. Do I have the ability? Sound familiar? B. Have the ability. And autonomy. Well, looky there, right? Internalizing. When we internalize that we can self-regulate ourselves, we have the power to drive the car. We don't need to go to the personal trainer, so to speak, right? That drives this internalization of your locus of control, drives your autonomy. When these three needs are met, it enhances your self-motivation, your mental health. We've known this for a long, long time. This is done traditionally in acceptance commitment therapy. I don't know if anybody has experience with that. So I just threw up, these are the 6 sort of, hallmarks of it, I suppose. And they all interact to help you with something, essentially executive function, right? And coping, and all of the things related to executive control. Okay, it helps you commit to further action. Accept where you are. All right, third one, last one. Focus on forming an identity. Who are you? Who are you? Identity transformation equals sustainable health. Behavior change by decreasing cognitive effort. So there's your magic pill, right? It's good to self-regulate, good to self-regulate. We can't do it forever. It's too effortful. You'll quit. You'll stop using MyFitnessPal. You'll uninstall the app. You're like, whatever. Too much. It's too much. So ideally, while you're self-regulating, we want to work on, at the same time, forming a strong identity that's going to help us pull us into the future even when we're exhausted. This is a quote straight from Atomic Habits, right, in the pop psych world. So it's getting out there. The message is getting out there. With outcome-based habits, okay, I want to exercise because I want to look good at the beach. The focus is on what you want to achieve. With identity-based habits, the focus is on who you wish to become. Here's one model that's now brand new that they're using in the literature called the Maintain It model. What you'll notice is the size of the bubbles changes, right? As I just said, as you move from initiation to maintenance, your need for executive function, something that's very laborious and effortful, decreases as your identity increases. As your identity increases. Now, this isn't just mumbo jumbo. There's actual techniques that fall into each of these categories to actually help people form identities, believe it or not. It's really cool. Some of those are listed up there in the fine print. Maybe we'll share those PowerPoints with you and you can check that out. Okay, on to my work real quick. We'll just end with this. I run interventions. I design interventions based on a need. Okay, an intervention is just a program that's meant to change behavior. They're multimodal. Check that out. Like buttons over there. I made the figure. Don't think anything of it. I know it's not that great. But they kind of look like buttons, right? Okay, so we have exercise and dietary prescription. We have groups, remember? Social support. That's one way we can bridge that gap from just saying exercise is good, do a little bit, right? We need social group. We need relatedness. Another, self-regulation. That's good. We need that. Here, that's the other thing we do. And then we use technology to deliver that, to make the connection, to get into their homes and actually get these people working on these skills. And then we do this is the cool part, we take them from supervised during the intensive phase to totally independent by the maintenance phase. And we do that through a series of steps. And those are some of the things we measure. Goal commitment and difficulty. You can think of that as a identity. So check this out. This is work from my dissertation a while back. And we took an 18-month intervention, weight loss intervention, weight management intervention for older, overweight individuals with knee osteoarthritis, with significant pain and mobility disability. What we did, we ran them through that program, that last figure. We pressed the play button and ran them through that program. What we saw was that goal commitment, or an identity of, hey, I can commit to this goal is aligned with my values, that was a significant mediator of downstream self-regulation. Being able to control your emotions, your behaviors, and your thoughts. Pretty cool, huh? So if you can help people set an identity, I am a doer, I'm not just a doer, I'm a solver, right? That kind of stuff, that can actually impact our ability to control ourselves. All right, and these are just people with high self-efficacy beliefs, that confidence. They're known, we know this, they take on difficult tasks, persevere longer, exhibit higher commitment to goals, and here's the evidence, at least from our study. All right, and then lastly, this is what I'm going to do next. Working in cancer prevention, cancer survivors. We've already done a handful of studies, but they've all been in person. So we meet in the community. Takes me a lot of hours in the car driving out there. So this is nice. COVID forced me to adopt a lot of things, and one of them is mHealth and eHealth. And notice if you have an app on your phone, it's typically just used to do one thing, maybe two. Exercise and sleep tracking, whatever, maybe two, okay? What we're hoping to do with this is integrate our cognitive behavioral therapy through Zoom, one click of a button, right there. They've got all of their exercises on videos right there. They've got their SMART goal setting activities right there. There's how they can interact with their groups, right? And then all the information, all the advice that they need is right here, all that advice, right? But the tracking and the therapeutic effect of group counseling and self-regulating up there, that's their toolbox that they'll develop. That can help them bridge that gap to action. Okay, I'm going to leave you with this, 3 questions for you, all right? I know you're already still thinking about compliance and adherence. A couple more things here. Who do you want to be? What is your why? What will you do today? Traditionally, those are flipped. What can you do today? Why would you do that? Who will it make you? I want you to flip this thing. I want you to organize it thusly. Who do you want to be is at the top. I want you to think about that first. How does that determine your why and what you want to do? All right? Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Chaplow.
You're welcome.